Listen to me, y'all. Christians, we have got to do better at this when it comes to the LGBTQIA community, specifically when it comes to trans people. Christians should be at the front of the line, or maybe second behind trans people, in protecting and promoting their inherent dignity, because we believe what the Bible says about their inherent dignity. If trans people are being bullied or mistreated, we don't have to agree with everything they believe to show up and say, we're not going for this. We will not stand by and watch people made in God's image be mistreated. And listen, I know it's messy, because quite frankly, I've experienced some trans people, gay people who they don't want my advocacy, for real, because of what I believe biblically. But we still lean in. We lean in. It is messy, but Jesus himself invites us into the mess, because read the Gospels. All the Gospels are just messy. As Jesus is willing to frustrate and confuse the religious elite, scandalize them, and at the same time confuse the sinners and the outcasts. You know why? Because he stepped into the messiness and the tension of truth and grace. And we have to refuse to compromise on either one of those. We should be people known for being radically committed to protecting and promoting the inherent dignity of everybody in the ways we talk about, in the ways we treat and even advocate for trans people. So then how does God meet us in that struggle? Because there's good news, and this is redemption. We're going to land just on these last three quickly, because this is just the gospel. This is just the gospel. And here's why we want to land on this. Because I've been praying. There's so many people, y'all, that have been praying and fasting for this message. I wish more y'all had been praying and fasting for last week's message, but
There it is. There it is. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conversations That Matter podcast. I'm your host, John Harris. The voice that you heard was Mike Kelsey. He is a pastor at McLean Bible Church, where David Platt is also a pastor. You've heard me talk about him before if you're a regular listener to the podcast. And I think what you quite clearly heard in that is that Christians are not doing enough. They are not advocating hard enough for trans, quote unquote, people. And because of that, it's confusing. Now, I find what he said somewhat confusing, but I'm here to try to demystify. I think many of us do. This is a preacher of the word of God. What's he doing saying this? It sends implications that I think we all know what it sounds like. But I think he wants to confuse a certain crowd, and that's the religious elites. So I don't know. Do I qualify? Is that the reason I'm confused? Because I'm a religious elite? Are you a religious elite? I don't think that's what it is. You know, and it wasn't the elitism. It wasn't the fact that the Pharisees were in control of things religiously that made them villains or unable to understand. It was the fact that they were blinded by their own tradition that had a purpose to it. That purpose was, of course, to help them game the system. And Jewish people today, religious Jewish people, people who are rabbinical Jews, are still doing the same kind of thing, right? This is something that if you live near a community like that, you know exactly what it looks like. It's trying to create rules that end up forming a perimeter around God's law. They cushion it, and you're good if you keep these man-made rules. But eventually those rules replace God's actual law. And Jesus, when he critiqued them, he drove them back to their authentic tradition, the source, the original tradition, and they had gotten off path. They had actually forsaken and contradicted what they were supposed to believe. So if those are the people Mike Kelsey's talking about, those are the religious elites, just like they were religious elites in Jesus's day. They're supposed to be confused by this. Now, I'm going to just give you my take on this. And this is the best read you can put on it, but I don't think this is what Mike Kelsey meant. The best read you could put on it are the religious elites are those who are in favorable positions with the media and the political class, those who are in Hollywood and in the education system. There's a rotating door between them and those who are in those fields. So they share an elite strata. They occupy a unique place where they are supposed to occupy the leadership class, and they are compromised. They have trans flags, rainbow flags, whatever, flying outside their churches. And if that's the kind of people he meant when he said religious elites, then they should be confused. But their confusion wouldn't be in your advocacy for trans rights, which apparently you're failing to do as Christians. We're not doing enough. Their confusion would be over why aren't we doing more than enough? Actually, they would be saying very similar things to what Mike Kelsey's saying. We're not doing enough. The trans people, they're being persecuted. They're being sidelined. They're not being elevated. Their lifestyle's not normalized enough. There's places where Christians who say they're Christians are trying to oppose drag queen story hour in libraries. I mean, that's the context. That's the social. I mean, if you're not going to go into detail about what you mean, that's what people think you mean. I don't think there's any way to defend this, to be quite honest with you. There's an obvious implication here. And I think what Mike Kelsey's trying to do is what you've seen from J.D. Greear, from David Platt, from people like Matt Chandler, on a whole host of political issues. It's the third way we talked about last week. It's the trying to maintain an orthodoxy. We believe what the Bible says about sin, but then also trying to say the kinds of things that curry favor with the actual elite class, which is what Mike Kelsey's doing. That's what I believe. It's the actual political class. Those who have actual authority in places like Washington, D.C., that he's trying to curry favor with. I mean, of all places to say this, right? It'd be one thing, perhaps, if you were in Branson, Missouri. Even there, this would be terrible. But it would be one thing if you were there. And you're out in middle America. You're saying these kinds of things. You're in a red area. And in the local community, maybe there's some way you could interpret this to mean, I don't know. I'm trying to bend over backwards to make this somehow have a favorable reading. I don't think there's a way to do it, but you could at least maybe try to say there's people out in these red areas and they're not at all trying to advocate for LGBTQ stuff. The leaders politically aren't trying to do that. So maybe they interpret what Mike Kelsey says differently. And in their minds, it means evangelism. It means we're going to go spread the truth of the gospel. We're going to confront the sin. We're going to be, I don't know. He said people should be at the front of the line. So at the front of the line, I mean, there's really hard to even make what I'm trying to say work. But let's just pretend it made sense out in middle America. He's in Washington, D.C. area. He's in Virginia, but he's in the northern part of Virginia, close to the Beltway. He's actually within the Beltway. And as he says this, it's in a very liberal saturated context. What do you think people hear when they hear Mike Kelsey say that? This is supposedly an evangelical. This is a church that preaches the Bible. This is a church that, at least up until recently, has been affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention because of the influence of David Platt. What is that supposed to mean? This is obviously terrible. This is obviously a compromise. This is obviously signaling to the elite class, to the people who are on the left, that we want to be the best advocates, the front of the line advocates for your dignity. Or what does that mean? I would say the biblical understanding would be you are the one that is in sin by participating in these lies and deceptions. And if there's participation in things that directly hurt other people physically and emotionally and so forth, you're in sin. You are in rebellion against your creator. So the first thing to do is you need to repent. And yes, maybe there are circumstances that along the way they didn't help. Let's talk about those. But you need to repent. You're in sin. You're adopting a lie. Would we do this with any of the sins that the world still thinks are wrong? Pedophilia, right? Would we do that with this? I'm not saying they're the same exact thing. I'm saying, though, they are both sins. And we wouldn't treat it that way. We wouldn't treat cannibalism this way. We wouldn't treat someone who had a disorder where they didn't believe one of the limbs that they have belonged to them. We wouldn't say, well, you should be at the front of the line for advocating for their dignity in a very blue area that is going to interpret that as political activism. And somehow Christians are failing. How are they failing? I mean, that's another clue here that he's trying to signal to the left. If Christians are failing at this, if they're not at the front of the line, it's because they are not, I guess, using the kind of rhetoric Mike Kelsey wants them to use. They're not saying things that are positive and compassionate and shows empathy towards the quote unquote trans community, which is, I mean, that's a whole nother issue there. Are there trans people? I mean, or is this, I mean, is that even acknowledging that? Is that a compromise on Mike Kelsey's part? And I've thought about it this way, guys. I got to be square with you here. I'm going to be honest. John Cooper texted me this week, and he sent me this clip. Okay, so I had seen people were sharing it around. I hadn't watched it yet. I just sort of got the description, and I was like, oh yeah, Mike Kelsey said, okay, makes sense. Well, John Cooper sent it to me, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, sometimes I feel like the work that we've done on this podcast, and so many of you have prayed, so many of you have given, so many of you are patrons, which I really deeply appreciate. In fact, sideshow here, I'm not going to go into depth on this, but I have something very big planned for next year. And if it works out, it will be, especially if you're a Southern Baptist, this will be very important. So I appreciate all the support. But anyway, the documentary work, all of that, all the things we've done, I do wonder if there are times when we have helped accelerate a process that people like Mike Kelsey and David Platt wanted to happen in the first place. What do I mean by that? I mean, if there was a plan to take a church like McLean Bible Church or a denomination like the Southern Baptist or a seminary or a institution, whatever it is that I've tracked, Crew, Southeastern, whatever they are. If there was a plan, let's say, to make those more palatable to the left, and then a guy comes in like myself who starts exposing the plan, or at least calling attention to the fact that whether it's a plan or not, this is what's happening effectively. I've wondered if that accelerates the process. You know what I mean? The goal that I've always had is, if you are a theological conservative and you are in these places and you're concerned about this, then you should stand up, fight it, or get out. If it's too late, you need to get out, but you need to warn others. You need to, and I think that there's an appropriate time to do that. Martin Luther knew there was a time to do that. He started out to try to purify the Catholic Church. He got shut down. Time to get out. Paul the Apostle went to the synagogues. He tried to purify. He tried to bring truth to the Jewish community. He had to start bringing it directly to the Gentiles. Time to get out. I've spent enough time. There's a time to get out, but there's a time to fight. And I'm wondering sometimes if, because of the fact that people are so fragmented and because of managerial elitism and the stranglehold that has over our institutions, and what I'm not going to explain that all now. I've done podcasts. I've written in books. Go read. I think I have a chapter you could read on leadership in the last book I published called Against the Waves, if you want to know more about that. But because of that stranglehold, people generally run for the hills. They aren't organized. And so what they'll do is they will see what's happening, it's exposed, and they try to get out. Maybe they try to do one rear guard action and then they're gone. And that means that a potential opposition is eliminated. And maybe at earlier stages, I don't know. But you expose these guys, you show what they're doing, and there are people who will flee that. They'll say, and for good reason at times, But I've wondered, is that part of the plan in some cases? Is that what some of these guys want to happen? In the case of Mike Kelsey here, just think about this. It's unlike J.D. Greear. I'm going to show you an article from J.D. Greear. J.D. Greear, he, I think, is more opportunistic, at least the way he behaves, and from my interpretation. And as things change politically, he's got to kind of pivot and morph. And whether he's convictionally a social justice guy or not, he's got to kind of go along with the new winds and waves and where things are going. I think that's more or less how he operates. I don't know if he's a pure ideologue, but Mike Kelsey, I suspect is. And when you see a video like this, after all the exposure of David Platt, after the documentaries, after the blogs and the podcasts and all the rest, and now it's gone mainstream, right? I mean, it started out, it was guys like myself. It was like A.D. Robles talking about it. There's a few places you could find commentary. You might go to Pulpit and Pen back when it was called that. Now it's Protestia, and find an article. Well, now you have bigger accounts. You have people. I mean, you have people at the Daily Wire who are now covering these kinds of stories. You have people who are at the Blaze, like Allie Beth Stuckey, who will even talk about these kinds of things now. And those, even people that I saw as more moderate to even left leaning on some things, I am seeing some of them come around. And I'm very grateful for this, by the way. I'm grateful that there's bigger platforms drawing attention to some of these things. But that should increase the pressure. But it doesn't seem to matter to someone like Mike Kelsey. That pressure increase, he's still going to go full steam on what he believes. I think it's because he actually believes it. And now that conservatives have basically left the church, so many of them, they've been purged. I would say, I mean, I don't think that's a wrong word to use once you watch the documentary. I think maybe this is the destination they wanted from the beginning. And at this point, if you're not part of one of the lawsuits or haven't been, there's really nothing. What are you going to do at the church? The battle's kind of happened at McLean, which is unfortunate. But I think it still is important to let people know at times, remind people this is what's going on. This is in a very prominent church in a very political area. And this is someone who's young. He's probably going to be in ministry for a long time to come. His material is going to be out there. He's got good connections. And this is what he believes. This is where he thinks he needs to put his energy, is getting evangelical Christians at his church in a blue area, very high power area, people who are involved in the political machine, to advocate more strongly, to be at the front of the line for advocating for the dignity of trans people. There you go. Okay. All right. Let's keep going here. That's my opener for the podcast. I think we're going to keep it with evangelical stuff, and then we're going to broaden it out to other issues here. But I'll take a few questions, get them in right now, because I'll check a few times. This will be my first time after I let you know about the places I'm going to be speaking. And so I would love to see you if you can come. I will be at the Jesus and Politics Conference coming up in Maple Grove Church in Topeka, Indiana, October 25th through the 26th. Actually, I think it's October 25th. But if you want to come to church, which I will finally be at church. I have never actually stayed Sunday, so I've never been at Tim Bushong's church in Syracuse, Indiana. I will be there. And so that's going to be exciting. And October 28th, I will be, that's a Tuesday, at the Texas Truth Movements event, that Valley Ranch Grill and Barbecue in Houston, Texas. So those are the two big ones coming up. Of course, November 7th through 9th, Truth is Forever Conference in Palm Harbor, Florida. Go to johnharrismedia.com. Check out the speaking engagements. All right, let's get to some comments here. Any reactions to what you heard? We got Squire George. I hate the demonization of the word religious. Our Protestant forefathers wore that word as a badge of honor. I believe that's correct. I don't think religion is a bad word. There's actually a lot of words that have been used in ways that put a bad taste in some people's mouth that are actually good words. And if they're used to describe the right things. In fact, I'm thinking of doing a show on the term Judeo-Christian, believe it or not. John, why would you attract that kind of attention? Because it's being used all over the place. I'm not a fan of using it, by the way, in most contexts, because I think it signals things like a shared kind of political alliance. And I think it's been used to dumb down Christian morals, virtues. It's gone from Christian values, or not even values, just it was kind of taken for granted that America's Christian. We're Christian. And then it becomes we're Judeo-Christian, to where family values, to we're just values. And now it's like you could drive a Mack truck through the fact that we're going to get to this Vivek Ramaswamy clip. And I joked about it on X. Islamo, Hindu, Judeo-Christian values. And actually, I posted that. I wasn't even thinking of Vivek. I was thinking of the situation in Texas that I covered 2 days ago. That is just, I think, really exposing the Trails Church, which is in, I believe, northern Dallas. And it's crazy to me that they've reacted to one of the members of their congregation, Daniel Keene, who he saw people doing an idol ceremony, essentially, in his neighborhood. They were Hindu, and he complained about it. I want my kids to grow up in America, not India. And that just became a problem. That became racist. That became insensitive. That wasn't reaching your neighbor, and those kinds of things. I don't know. Maybe they feel like the way that Mike Kelsey feels. He should be at the front of the line to advocate for certain groups, but not others. I don't know. Advocating for Americans, in contrast to Indians and their practices, that's frowned upon in Big Eva circles. Anyhow, I do digress. That's what I was thinking of is what kind of metric are they operating off of? It's not a Christian metric. So what is it? I'm joking. It's a Hindu, Judeo, Islamo, put anything else you want in there. And anyway, but there is an academic way. In fact, this term Judeo-Christian, you can even find instances, not many, but you can find instances of this being used in the 19th century. When you're talking about Western civilization, when you're talking about not the Greco-Roman, there's another hyphenated Greco-Roman influence, but the Judeo-Christian influence on Western civilization. And it really is just a signal that the Ten Commandments, the basis of the moral law, what Alfred the Great looked at when he was constructing his Book of Doom, these things are sourced in not the Roman tradition or the Greek tradition or the pagan European tradition. These are actually sourced in a Middle Eastern tradition that did come to Europe, Judeo-Christian. And so this has been used in archaeology. It's been used in other places before it was used in political circles. And I think it's important for people to know some of that. So I might cover some of that just so you don't go crazy every time you hear the word. It depends how the word's used and how someone's thinking about it when they're using it. And when Charlie Kirk uses the word and he's describing a shared tradition, a shared commitment to the laws of Moses, for example, I don't know that that's necessarily a compromise. There is even at the founding era, right? There's a shared affinity you find where Jews are basically a tolerated minority, and there was about 2,000 of them here when we had our Constitution. And there's George Washington himself even signals that he is very accommodating to those people. So anyway, that's an example of a word that has then been misused, and now it's in some circles it's viewed as you're totally compromised. It's a smear. The word winsome's another one. You use the word winsome. Winsome's actually a good word if used in the right context. And there's a lot of words like that. So to the point, I didn't mean to get on that rabbit trail. Now I don't have to do a podcast about Judeo-Christian. I just gave you the too long didn't read. But I think the word religion is actually not a bad word. James uses that word. It's translated, but it's a good translation. It's true and undefiled religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress and keeping oneself unstained from the world. Nothing wrong with that world. Paul, when he's at Mars Hill, I see that you were very religious. Some translations say superstitious, but you're committed. You're committed to this transcendent spiritual kind of matrix, this belief in something beyond the material. And you're very religious. You have gods you worship. You exercise a sacrifice, a cult in the best. That's another word. But you're actually putting in efforts to, in a communal way, try to honor something that's false. But you're religious, right? So it's not necessarily always a bad word. What exactly is there to advocate for trans people? Asked Bryce. Lack of specificity is intentional. Kind of seems that way. Queen Shaw, he doesn't meet us in our struggle. We are dead. We're not struggling in sin. We are fully given over to it and dead to God. He redeems us and gives us life. Amen. Scott, me and John need to make a trip to SCBTS to debate the Christian nationalism issue with the professors. I don't know what that would look like. And I just don't even know what that looked like. I would be willing if the right circumstance emerged. And for me, the right circumstance for a debate, because debates don't happen now. It's like Jubilee stuff. I don't know if I would do Jubilee. Maybe. I don't think I'm big enough account that they would consider me anyway. But, if I reached that level and I was asked to do Jubilee, I would consider it just because of the platform. But I kind of hate it. I'll be honest. I really do. It's like the shorts version of debating. It's not actually debating. It's sound bites, it's zingers. The metrics used are just not the metrics that I think should be used. It's a dumbing down of our culture to even have a show like that. But here we are, right? And so you have to have a debate partner who is committed to, I think, to have a real debate, to a similar process, that you're going to adjudicate truth. You're going to do research. You have a shared kind of way of figuring out what the truth is. There has to be something in common. You have to at least have respect for one another, so that you don't, so it's viewed as actually improper and impolite and wrong to start going ad hominem, which is basically all you have in modern debates. It's all ad hominem. So anyway, to Scott, your point, I will be with you any day that we can find a situation that would meet those qualifications. I would certainly go to Southeastern and debate public theology and that kind of thing if it's something that would be beneficial. Conceptual Clarity says, sounds to me like the trans update of J.D. Greer's 2014 gay rights is godliness message. I think, and maybe I haven't heard that one. I certainly in the fall, How the Fall Affects Us All, he talks about being advocates for homosexuals and that Christians should be the strongest advocates, something along those lines. And it's like, what? All right. Let's keep going here. One more question, and then we'll keep going, or two. Okay. How would be the proper way to care for their dignity? Right. That's the question. What does that even mean? Right. When they are saying that being offended by over idolatry amounts to bigotry, don't we need to demand an overhaul of the conceptualization of anti-bigotry? I have to think about what you're asking here. Okay. Yes. All right. Yes. So I think to phrase that in a positive way, that the very conception of bigotry has been misused or overused so that it's lost its meaning. I would agree with that. I think bigotry has a bad connotation to it, but actually there are things we should be bigoted against. We should make separations against, at least. I think I'm using that word right. I should probably look it up as I'm saying there's a positive way to use this word. I don't know in this culture if that's a salvageable thing. What would I look up? The etymology, I guess. Yeah, the etymology. I so often go to etymology before definition. Okay, so it means maybe it doesn't have a positive meaning, actually. I'm on online etymology. 1590s, that's when you find it. Sanctimonious person, religious hypocrite. Okay, so maybe it doesn't, which is of unknown origin. The sense was extended 1680s to opinions other than religious. That is so interesting that this had a religious origin. The earliest French use of the word is as the name of people apparently in southern Gaul, which led to victory. Okay, so the Visigoths. It comes from the Visigoths, the word. All right. Okay, so so bigotry means being sanctimonious. Interesting. I did not know that. Okay, well, let's just assume negative connotation, bigotry. It has been so applied so broadly. Any kind of separation is now viewed as bigotry. Any kind of disagreeableness with something that doesn't match a supposed, according to the sociologists, privileged class is bigotry. Well, that's just nuts. No, of course not. I mean, if you can you be bigoted? It's like the term racist. Can you be bigoted against someone who holds power, cultural power, in the mind of a sociologist? And the answer, of course, is no. Any anti-male or anti-Christian or anti-European sentiments don't seem to be qualified as bigotry, right? Okay, what professor at SCBTS are Christian nationalists? I don't think any. I don't think anyone would say that. If they would, they certainly wouldn't say it out loud. I wouldn't think so, at least. Okay, let's switch here and let's talk about J.D. Greear. Can we do that? We've already been talking about Greear a little, so why don't we just talk about this piece? In the pages of the Gospel Coalition, Faithfulness Amid the Culture War, prophetic boldness, gospel priority, and whether the third way is still helpful. That third way. Now, this is an article that I have been aware of just because it's posted online, but I decided to do a cold reading. I haven't actually read it in detail, and I didn't want to see people's reactions. Really, I was trying to stop that because we're going to just sort of like discover this together and apply what we've learned on this podcast for so long. So it starts out, faithfulness to Jesus' mission isn't less than boldness in the culture war. It's much more. Many wonder if the days of a nonpartisan approach to Christian cultural engagement are over. In recent years, they say the lines have been more clearly drawn, and thus Christians, especially pastors, need to be less hesitant to align the cause of Christ with the right side of the political aisle. We should be willing to connect the dots, name names, and formalize our identification with the Republican Party. Even lead with that in our church's messaging to our communities. Now, I don't know what he's talking about. I haven't heard anyone say that you should lead with an identification with the Republican Party. That seems like a straw man to me. I've never seen that even in the hardest core religious right churches. But okay, that's what he's saying is out there and seems to be a pressure that's popular. They say the response to Charlie Kirk shows us it works evangelistically, at least for a lot of young men. Words like nonpartisan, nuance, and winsomeness are code words for compromise and likely indicate a leader has fallen under the spell of the progressive gaze. Even though these compromises sanctimoniously, there's that word again, masquerade under the cloak of for the sake of evangelism. Now, I'm actually going to give J.D. Greear a valid point here. I know, John. Why would you ever do that? I mean, I don't agree with his conclusions, I don't think, because I did skip ahead to see where he was going to land. But I will say this. There are people like this, not maybe to the extent J.D. Greear is implying, but there are people who do think that this is the new church growth thing. This is the formula. You've just got to reach the young men. That's where Christianity is growing, and that's where there's an opportunity. And look at the amount of young men who are very right-leaning, or if they're not right-leaning, they're certainly against the left in some way, shape, or form. And so make sure your church does that. Now, I think there's a truth to this. I do think there's I do think there are people who are formulaic, who want to do it for the wrong reasons, who are looking at it as a branding thing. I think that does happen. And I think but I don't think that's motivating a lot of the shifting. I think there are a lot of people who are shifting, and it's for legitimate reasons. Their eyes have been opened, and they're seeing clearly what's going on. It's hard in initial stages to tell sometimes, especially with guys who are already church growth guys. Let's face it, a guy like I don't know, a David Howard. Is it David Howerton or what's his name? The pastor. I've talked about him so many times before. I think it's Josh Howerton. I think that's his name. Okay. Yeah. Josh Howerton. All right. Someone like a Josh Howerton. It would be much more difficult, I think, to figure out whether or not this is a strategy or whether he's actually changing his mind on things. This is a guy who had Beth Moore come and preach at his church. This is a guy who was all in for Black Lives Matter. This is a guy who is making videos to support BLM. I've gone all over all of that. And now he's a guy that is being considered by right-wing, we'll say high levels, to be someone who's essentially in their camp, someone worthy of being platformed. It's frustrating sometimes for guys who are legitimately right-wing in their conservative instincts, their theological instincts, because they'll look at a guy that is very good at marketing. I call it sometimes wrapping paper podcasts. Like, they're really good at taking other people's ideas and making them look palatable because you have good camera angles and you know what style, you know how to communicate it. And so I think that, and he has a platform already, but so it's a frustration for some people, but I think I don't want to completely discount the move he's making. Maybe he's legitimately starting to come to some realizations. Now, it would be good if he had just really came out there very clearly and said, I was wrong when I advocated the things I just mentioned. Anyway, I think maybe that's my best shot at trying to put some meat on the bones and saying that, maybe that's what J.D. Greear here is talking about. But he says, one pastor friend even told me rather cheekily regarding his political views, people need to know where their pastor stands. I've decided if I'd say it around the fire pit, I'll say it from the pulpit. Anything less isn't authentic. I don't know if I completely agree with that, but like every political view. I mean, there's certain political views that dovetail with basic morality. Then yes, what the Bible teaches about things, you should be unapologetic about. Certainly, whether that translates into a specific strategy for how to deal with issues like immigration, or I even think, and this will this will be something that some of you will disagree with, but I even think when it comes to the strategy utilized in ending abortion, I don't know that a pastor needs to endorse a particular strategy other than ending it, right? Like, I don't know that a pastor has to come out and say, this is the legal strategy we should adopt next month when the new session starts in our state. I don't know that that's required. Now, it could be very helpful, but what does the Bible say? How does the Bible apply? And that really is the question. So Epstein killed himself. The church, a pastor who thinks that he did, a pastor who thinks he didn't. Is there room there? I think there is, for both pastors believing what the Word of God teaches and not having to necessarily weigh in and make it an element of their church, part of their statement of faith, that you have to have a particular position on this. Anyway, that's where I would draw lines. I don't, J.D. Greear, we'll see what he says, but he says faithfulness, it's believed, means making clear where we line up politically. Let me briefly explain here why I think it is not only a mistake, but a lack of faithfulness to the mission of Jesus. So here we go. And before you dismiss this as simply as a representation of the same old third way, it's not. Parts of that approach need to be jettisoned, but parts need to be maintained. Let me explain. J.D. Greear was a pretty big third way guy, so I'm curious to see what he's going to jettison and whether he will take actual personal accountability for the full third way teaching of Tim Keller, which he definitely applied. Our central assignment. Let's start with a specific commission Jesus gave us before he left. As Jesus prepared to ascend back to heaven, his disciples asked him, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? The disciples were asking about when and how Jesus would establish his political kingdom on earth and what they might do to help bring it about. And Jesus replied, it is not by you to know the times or the seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. Think of all the things Jesus could have said to them here. And you will be my Bible study years, or you will be my prayers, or my advocates for justice and mercy, or my nation preservers. To be sure, he expects his followers to do all these things, but the single word he chose in this moment was witnesses. Similar. Okay. But part of being a witness is being an example, showing people all of the things he mentioned. Anyway, similarly, in Matthew's verse, I don't think it's an interesting point. What's the point? Similarly, in Matthew's version of the Great Commission, the only verb used is mathetusete, make disciples. Everything else that looks like a verb in those verses is a participle. In Greek, participles gather their force from the verb. Thus, make disciples is a central thing, okay? Jesus commanded the church to be about the verb around which all our other activities are organized. Gospel proclamation holds a privileged and primary place in the Christian's commission. Fine. That's going to include moral issues that translate into political issues, though, right? Societal transformation, important part of our witness. Okay, of course, learning to implement Jesus' teaching in all spheres of society is an important dimension of discipleship. Jesus commanded us to teach his disciples all things he commanded. And as a Dutch Reformed theologian, Abraham Kuyper, famously said, there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human life of which Christ, who is sovereign of all, does not cry mine. That means we must teach followers of Jesus to let their Christian worldview permeate every square inch of their lives, which include, of course, their politics. Now, J.D. Greear, I don't know if he knows this, but, Kuyper, kind of an advocate for apartheid in South Africa. I don't know if is that acceptable? Is that not? It was Kuyper. I don't know. I'm just wondering, is it acceptable to quote Kuyper still? Furthermore, social transformation, he says, is an important part of our gospel witness. Everywhere the gospel has been preached, life-giving societal reformation is followed. As British historian Tom Holland points out, many values and freedoms now cherished in modern Western society came from Christians who brought their worldview into politics. Tom Holland, I think, and I've listened to some Tom Holland. I think part of what he does is he tries to credit Christianity for the achievements of liberalism too, and I want to be careful about that. You could say classic liberalism has elements of Christianity in it, or a freeze-framed Christianity for that time. Certain conditions in society that were needed to be justified, but not doing it on a Christian framework necessarily, shifting that framework to more secular framework to justify it, and then suffering the consequences, which is where we are with neoliberalism. And anyway, I think Tom Holland is basically trying to. This is how I see it, guys. I think he's trying to get Christianity off the hook by showing, hey, look at all the liberal things that Christianity's produced, and sort of crediting Christianity with it. I don't know that that's necessarily the most honest way to approach this, but I'm not surprised J.D. Greear is quoting Tom Holland here. Most were virtually unknown before Christians introduced them. Historical theologians from Glenn Scrivener to N.T. Wright and Michael Bird point this out. Is it Scrivener? I don't know. Wright and Bird say most people in today's world, Michael Bird, really? Most people in today's world recognize as noble the ideas that we should love our enemies, that the strong should protect the weak, and that it is better to suffer evil than to do evil. People in the West treat such things as self-evident moral facts. Okay, so the other societies didn't have that. We live in a much better world because Christians got involved in politics. We might argue that it was what most tarnish our witness in society is that we failed to apply that worldview thoroughly enough. For instance, the persistence of institutionalized discrimination and the Jim Crow laws in the Baptist South undermined, of course he's going to use that, undermined gospel testimony here for generations. Do I want to get into this? Popular media outlets today still depict strong evangelical convictions and racial discrimination as synonymous. You might think that's unfair, but the inconsistency of many evangelical Christians on this issue makes that smear all too easy. Okay, I was just going to say this because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think he used that example on purpose because he wants to point out hypocrisy, and he's in North Carolina. So this is a problem, and these were right-leaning people, essentially, who adopted this system. I pointed out before, if you read C. Van Woodward, if you actually research Jim Crow, this is something that started in the North. It spread south really after the Redeemer governments. There was a lag time sort of between the end of the Civil War and then the implementation of Jim Crow, and it was mainly in urban areas that this was applied. I think now people are starting to understand more why that system was set up. There were abuses in that. There were things that today, and certainly you can go back and find narratives where there was a lot of racial tension. There were things done that weren't in keeping with Christianity. But I do think that the whole idea behind this, or the motivation essentially behind this, was the recognition that there were two societies and that were different than each other. They affected each other. There was, to some extent, some communion and fellowship between them, but they were different in the ways they operated. And because the traditional society of the Old South had been broken in one of the most irresponsible ways, and then in a war-torn scenario where people are starving, there was the heavy hand of Reconstruction governments, the Union League, and then the Klan arises, and there's chaos. This system emerges essentially to try to keep peace, to not have as much social strife, and obviously leftists would say that this was a way to dominate. I don't think that's entirely incorrect. I think there's the system that was there previously, even though there were some black members of the aristocracy and who owned slaves and so forth. Primarily, it was people of European descent who were on the top of the social ladder in making decisions and those kinds of things. It was in part a reassertion of that, and so I think it is complicated. But I do think that if you actually study this issue, you will find people. Okay, this is going to get me in trouble. I'm going to say it though. You will find people, not just in the South, but in the North probably as well. I haven't studied the North as much, but certainly in the South, who were strong Christians who accepted this arrangement as not as the perfection, not as the goal, but as a way to preserve some kind of a peace, some kind of an arrangement where you weren't fighting each other, and better than the alternative. And they were more or less in their Christian ethics consistent. There were people who could look at that situation and see alternatives that were worse and say, well, it's not the best situation, but how do we build trust? How do we go from A to B? This is the funny part. When people who haven't even read this stuff, if you read the Southern Manifesto, for example, you'll see that they're saying, look, if you do forced integration here, the trust we're trying to build up here over time, you're going to make it worse. You're going to ruin race relations. It seems to me like what's happened historically is race relations are worse in many ways. Despite all the screaming about racial reconciliation and the rest, the policies that have been enacted on the South, where there's large populations of Black people, and that have led to white flight, that have severed the relationship even more between whites and Blacks, have made it worse, have made the animosity worse, have made, that's where you get the tearing down of some of these statues and so forth, is because it's seen as that represents the oppressor, even though it's just memorializing people who fought in wars and so forth. It's letting these urban areas go to pot. And now it's like, well, we got to do a Marxist thing. We got to take money from some people, give it to others. Is that Christian? No. And that's what J.D. Greear's basically been advocating. J.D. Greear's been advocating the solution to this whole mess, the solution to all the bad policy decisions that have taken place over more than a century is to do a social justice thing. That's what Christians should do. And it's only made it worse, essentially. And so how do Christians, this is the bottom line. This is why I'm bringing all this to you. And yes, I'm oversimplifying some things, but this is what Christians have to figure out who are in these situations. Same thing with Israel, Palestine, by the way. How in the world do you come into a situation that has all this kinds of baggage over the periods of centuries? Trust isn't built up. And what are you going to do? Have a perfect Christian society that you can just figure out with peace from this? Or are you going to have limitations? Are you going to have arrangements that you're not completely comfortable with, but it's a stepping stone to something better? What do you do? That's an honest question. I mean, there's segregation between Palestine and Israel. It's segregation. I mean, I can't believe there's Christians, probably people like J.D. Greear, who would, in general, their history has been to support Israel. And are you supportive of segregation? Well, in some contexts, apparently, right? Because what's the alternative? Basically a genocide. And what do you have in Israel right now? And between Israel and Palestine? I mean, come on, guys. We can be adults and think through these complex situations and still be Christians about it, even if you have a policy decision that isn't the best, but it's not where we want to go, but we can't get there through any other way. So we're going to have to settle for something that's not the best arrangement, not what we want. Ultimately, it's not utopia, but there's no alternatives. I think that's how a lot of Christians felt. And I know this in part from even just personally conversations I've had with members of the greatest generation who lived under some of these conditions. And maybe I'll share some of those stories someday. I mean, that generation has died out just about. And I've wanted to, especially for people I've known, I've wanted to kind of shield them. I don't want to bring them into people who aren't political. I don't want to bring them into these things, but talk to people who are older. Ask them this is a good question, by the way. If you know anyone, and I don't mean members of the baby boomer generation, if you know anyone who's still like silent generation, who remembers, because the boomer generation is like, they were sort of coming, their political consciousness was coming of age right when the forced integration was happening. And there was a lot of propaganda and a lot of stuff going on that I think influenced many of them, as well as the conditions on the ground. Find someone from the silent generation if you can, and talk to them about, hey, what were the conditions here before forced integration, before the Great Society, before affirmative action, before all of that mess. What was it like? Were race relations better? I have yet to find someone who was in that world who has told me that in the modern day, race relations are better than it was when they were a kid. Now, there's probably exceptions to this. Someone who got beat up, but someone who actually suffered actual violence is probably not going to say that. But I've just found there's actually some solid Christians, Black people included, who have said, no, actually, it was even better. We had higher birth rates, or we had higher births that weren't out of wedlock. There was a more stable community where we were. The businesses were better. We actually had better relationships with those who were white. I've had the conversations. Doesn't mean that segregation is quote unquote good it's not good in a universal sense. It doesn't mean it, but J.D. Greear here, and this is why I'm taking a little bit of time to flesh this out. He wants you to believe a cartoon. He wants to just basically go back to the boogeyman, the boogie word, segregation. That means that Christians were a bunch of hypocrites. That Baptists, your Baptist heritage, anyone who lived in that society, including Lottie Moon, by the way, and had just accepted it, they're all a bunch of villains. I wrote an article, and it was published as an appendix for Christianity and Social Justice, that book. And I pointed out how Lottie Moon is essentially a wicked racist, according to the logic of J.D. Greear here. But yet they'll still do the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, right? If you tear down all your spiritual heroes because you just import present egalitarian instincts and you don't put them in the context in which they lived, then you do them a very big disservice. And I'm someone here who personally finds racial segregation to be very, I would say, personally kind of odious. I don't like putting up barriers like that are forced at all, or at least state. And one of the things about, if you study that issue, is especially in rural areas, these things were not enforced really. But I don't like it at all. I have issues personally with that. I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I mean, I'm part of also the culture that I grew up in some ways. I have some of those instincts, but I want to get to like that. This is sort of like what I've been wired with too. And I share this with many people of my generation. We want to get past some of these things so that we can have a shared society where there isn't violence. And so, but here's the thing. You got to deal with what you have. You got to deal with what you have. And we got to be grown-ups, and we got to put on our big boy pants. And we got to be able to look at reality for what it is. We got to be able to see crime rates. We got to be able to see the on-the-ground conditions of what happens in societies when there's a mixing that's not good for either party. And we got to be able to assess those things in a way that's responsible. And that's what Christians do. And Christians, when they come into situations on the foreign mission field, you don't just import all your American social arrangements. Excuse me. You are coming into areas where there's centuries of disagreements and different cultural practices and conflicts and all kinds of things. And you are there to make disciples in that environment. Hopefully making disciples leads to more peace, more people treating each other the way that they should, less societal friction and so forth. But you're still going to have differences between people groups. And it's still sometimes, even when the gospel goes forward, it is still sometimes good for one family to go one way and one family or one nation to go one way and one nation to go a different way on it. We see this in our own families today. Goodness gracious. So I just think that for J.D. Greear to bring that, why didn't he bring up abortion? Why didn't he bring up a very clear-cut moral issue? That's extremely clear-cut. Murder is wrong. It is a baseline level, according to God, issue. If someone justified segregation on the basis of they're not people, they're lesser than, that's wrong. It's on a Christian ethic. It's evil. Okay. Go back to something that's rooted in biblical, like to the bone moral argumentation, instead of trying to apply into a particular context something that the left also just would totally agree with you on, because they have an egalitarian way of getting there, which is, I think you infiltrate your congregation if you just kind of leave it hanging there. Just be careful of that. I guess that's what I'm saying. Just be careful of that. There's so many clear-cut moral issues you could bring into this. Okay, I've waxed long. It's my podcast. I can wax long, right? I can go 2 hours, right? And you can listen to whatever section you want. So I guess I have the right to do that. All right, well, let's keep going. Ron is saying, I can't stomach the mental gymnastics Greear uses to avoid saying outright that he is a liberal Democrat pastor. Just say it, dude, and quit blending your brand of social justice and Christianity. I don't know what he's registered as, to be quite honest. I mean, Tim Keller is a registered Democrat. Mark Devers is a registered Democrat. I don't know that we know. I don't think North Carolina lets you look that up for someone like a J.D. Greear. He might be a Republican, but he might be, a certain type of Republican. All right. Still, we can't ignore that in the ministry of Jesus, preaching the gospel often trumped engagement with political questions, even important ones. Let me use an example from the great Martin Lloyd-Jones. In Luke 12, he pointed out Jesus is asked by the younger of two brothers to adjudicate on his behalf, speaking into a particularly relevant issue in first century Palestine. The older brother is using his position and existing law to cheat the younger brother out of the rightful inheritance. This younger brother is a legitimate social justice complaint. Okay, Greear. Yeah, you want to hold on to that word social justice, don't you? Even though it just about universally means at this point redistributive justice. Okay. And yet, instead of giving a specific, you might even say political answer to the problem, Jesus withholds his opinion. Instead, he says, man who made me a judge or arbiter over you. He then preaches a sermon on greed, warning both brothers and the listening crowd about the idolatry of money. We ask, why not give his opinion on the case? Did he not care? Was he not up to his task? I mean, look, J.D. Greer's given his opinion on how many police shootings, certainly the whole issue with George Floyd. J.D. Greear was way out front and center giving. So I don't know. Is J.D. Greear saying that he shouldn't have done that? It would be nice to hear him say it. Lloyd-Jones says it wasn't because Jesus didn't care about justice, far from it, or even that he felt unqualified to answer. Had Jesus weighed in on this one, two things likely would have happened. First, he would have cut off from his influence anyone in Israel who agreed with his older brother. Second, the next day, he would have had a line a mile long of people wanting him to weigh in on their justice issues, which would have kept him from his primary mission, preaching the gospel, making disciples. So he sat this one out so he could stay on mission, giving a warning about idolatry that applied to all. Is J.D. Greear, in writing this article, violating this, though? I mean, is he making disciples writing an article on it? He's writing on these ethical, political issues. He just gave us his opinion on segregation and how wicked it is. And so, I mean, is this, I don't know. Like, is J.D. Greear violate? Why doesn't he just stay on mission, guys? Why doesn't he just stay on mission? The Apostle Paul follows suit. First century Rome had legions of social and political problems, and while Paul offers a passing rebuke to some of them in his epistles, none of his epistles take moral or political reformation in Rome as its subject matter. I would have loved to hear Paul's prescription for a new and better Rome, but his focus is on witnessing to Jesus, church building, and making disciples. I'm not trying to equate the responsibilities of Christians today with those of first century Rome. After all, we have opportunities they didn't have. As Oskinus says, we're in a Western democracy. All right. So we want to be good citizens. He says, rather, I'm saying that every point in the New Testament, Jesus and the apostles consistently steer the movement away from nation building or nation preserving and toward evangelism and disciple making, at least in terms of what they regard as their priority. What comes first? This line is golden. This line takes the cake for me. Okay. Apply that to family. The gospel doesn't require us to go out and do family building or even family preserving. I mean, you want to preserve your family. You want to preserve your community. You want to preserve your business. That's not the gospel, guys. I mean, come on. Your mission is to make disciples. It's not to go preserve your business. Keep the emphasis where it needs to be. Don't preserve your country. I mean, or if you do it, it's got to be second, guys. It's got to be so secondary. Excuse me. What are most of the activities we do in life? How much time do you spend at your job every day? Are you making disciples at your job, or are you providing for your family? Interesting how that one works. Is it okay if you're in politics and that's your focus, right? Now, if you are in the church and you have people coming in and those people's time, most of it is spent. I don't care if they're on the evangelism team. Most of their time is spent doing work, quote unquote, secular work. Most of them have families to feed. What do you do with those people? How do you encourage them? How do you preach the things in scripture that tell you how to take care of your country, your family, your business? Does God care about those things? Is it like a hierarchy? Like how does this, here's the thing. I think there's actually a good point to be made. I don't know if J.D. Greear is actually making it though. The point to be made, and the way I think to frame this in a good way, is to say the church has a primary duty to make disciples because that's the purpose of that institution. And in making disciples, we are going to confront ethical issues. Those ethical issues will affect the way you live, and they will signal that one political party is acceptable while another one is not as much. And it's okay to be honest and apply that. You're not actually taking anything away from you are being faithful to making disciples when you tell people the Democratic Party is not an option. Look at their platform. It's not an option. It's just not. The Republican Party, you have a seat at the table. You can still maintain your moral convictions. Why is that not something that you should be loud and clear about? I don't know why, but segregation, I don't know. Is someone still going around advocating for that, by the way? I'm certainly not. I don't know of anyone who is. No, I don't think anyone wants to go back to that arrangement, except maybe some people online without influence. It's a worthy discussion to talk about what other arrangements will be better than what we're living in now, certainly. So can we even have that discussion? Is that just not making disciples? Don't you want a pastor to be involved in some of these discussions? Maybe it's not something for Sunday morning. Maybe it's not something to put on the doctrinal statement for your church. Certainly not. But like, where don't you want people that have the moral, thus saith the Lord imperative that they know to be the ones that are in the room? Or do we want Fox News to call the psychologists and the sociologists up? Perhaps it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I mean, maybe. I'm saying on the one hand that the gospel transformed all levels of society, on the other, that we're to follow Jesus' example by not encumbering the church's mission in public policy questions, since our primary commission is to be the witness and make disciples. Is it a contradiction? Well, J.D. Greear is so weird with the gospel when he uses that term because it's an adjective. Gospel power of God to salvation, Christian ethics, making disciples. Making disciples is broader than just the gospel message, guys. The church as an organism and organization. Kuyper puts forward a distinction that helps resolve the dilemma. Okay, so the church is an organization. The church is also an organism. So you have members who go into society and do things, and you have, as an organization, a more specific focus. Church members, as part of the Christian organism in society, can and should bring their perceptions of God's wisdom, like salt and light, into every sphere of society. Church leaders, by contrast, as representatives of the organization, should, in general, limit their advocacy to which the Bible directly teaches, because people tend to equate what institutional church leaders say with what God says. We church leaders shouldn't tie God's name or the church's authority to something he hasn't directly said, especially regarding things about that Christians disagree on. I'm not talking about backing down from declaring anything God's word. Okay, I got to skip through this. I'm going to skim it. I'm reading, but I'm sort of going to skim it for you. Okay, so you have to be honest about things like sexual sin, King Herod, John the Baptist example. God's word doesn't speak directly on political applications, though it's implied. Okay, so how would you apply this? I have opinions on those things. And not only do I think they're right, but I think they're informed by my Christian worldview, but they're applications of Christian wisdom, applications that I could be wrong about, applications. So I don't know, do you just not apply this to policy? I do think there is a ton. So when I was talking earlier about like abortion strategy, there are multiple avenues perhaps that Christians could disagree on about how to end abortion in a very practical way, in a very practical place, in a state where you have, for example, I was just talking to Danny Steinmeier, he's in Idaho, and Doug Wilson's in Idaho. And they have, I think, different ideas about how to end that. I think from I'm not in Idaho, okay? So I would probably be more, I want what both of them are after, but I think I'd probably lean more towards what Danny Steinmeier is telling me. He's a friend and he's informing me, so there's that. But I think that in a situation like that, a pastor can certainly give advice about what they think the right thing ethically to do in the situation is. And there are very clear things. Abortion's wrong. It needs to be ended. That's like a very clear thing. It's murder. How the strategy to get there in as soon as possible way may differ among pastors. But what you can't do is just sidestep the policy question altogether by saying we won't talk about policy. Actually, you're talking about policy, even if you have strategic differences, like I think it should be this bill. I think it should be this bill. I think this, like you do need to be a prophetic voice to the world and to the people in your church who are voting in a democratic system by saying the government needs to do it. Okay, that is, you're in policy now. I'm sorry. You're in policy. Even if you think it should be something that is more strategic, if you do it gradually or something, even then, say the government needs to do it. It's their responsibility. You're in policy land. I'm sorry. Is this because I'm cowardly? Greear asks. I don't know. This is more of like a, it's more eye-opening about what Greear thinks of himself. Does he? I wonder, does he daydream about these things? Am I cowardly, or because I don't think he's the focus? I guess Christians, the worldview, has anything to say about those questions? No, it's because witness is my primary responsibility. Well, you didn't think that when it came to George Floyd, did you, JD? Or even, the war in Iraq, he didn't even think. Was it the war in Iraq? Was it J.D. Greear? No, I'm thinking of Russell Moore. J.D. Greear, I don't know if he had a position on that, but he certainly did on the Me Too stuff. All right. Growing up, I was always warned about there's a ditch on the left, there's a ditch on the right. Okay. Jesus exemplified this balance because you had zealots like Simon, and they were against Rome, and Jesus, and you had, okay, so Jesus is the moderate, I guess. Jesus is sort of like or he just sidesteps the issue. Okay. Ultimately, Jesus' kingdom teaching would undermine and transform both the left and the right of his day, because his kingdom is not of this world. I want to make it clear these examples that I'm not saying the errors of the political right and left in our country are morally equivalent. Sometimes in my preaching, I've implied that, and that's wrong. Whoa. Okay, good for J.D. Greear. Good for J.D. Greear. That's actually, that's an admission. I'm wrong. I am wrong. Okay, good. Nor am I saying that, I got to read that again. Sometimes in my preaching, I've implied that, and that's wrong. Okay, he doesn't say I am wrong, but he said that's wrong. Okay. Nor am I, he hasn't implied that. He's basically said that, guys. Don't cushion it. Nor am I saying that there aren't clearly wiser choices in certain elections. I wish that the only differences in our country is two primary political parties were prudential questions like the wisdom of tariffs or the idea of marginal tax rate. Okay, that is a prudence issue. He's right about that. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party has officially enshrined into its platform the unqualified affirmation of murder of infants in the womb and wholehearted embrace of gender and sexual rebellion. Well, J.D. Greear, this has been a long time they've had this in their platform, and you, during that time, have implied, in your words, that the two sides are morally equivalent. So what changed? I'm just curious. I think the ground underneath you did. In calling out these errors with prophetic boldness, some will say we sound partisan, but call them out we must. I'm saying, however, that like Jesus, political engagement isn't what pastors should lead in. Social transformation is downstream from Christian witness, not the tip of the spear. This is the problem, though. Greear has kind of contradicted himself on this, and it has been for years kind of a brand of his to say provocative things that provoke the right-leaning Christian because of his social justice advocacy. For 3 years, I served as president of the SBC. Okay. I try to speak clearly. It's not that I think shortcomings on the political right are worse than those on the political left. Far from it. Rather, my primary concern in all things is that people think rightly about Jesus. When it comes to the recent Republican capitulation on killing the unborn, President Trump's public repudiation of the way of Jesus, moral hypocrisy, here we go. Of certain Republican leaders, any affirmation of lawlessness or use of language that doesn't convey the dignity and respect others are worthy of, I can't let my appreciation of Republicans' moral clarity on certain issues keep me from speaking out clearly about the wickedness. This article is so muddled, guys. There really aren't any good categories that he is showing clearly how to use and navigate in this article. He's all over the place because he's, on the one hand, saying our primary mission needs to be the gospel, and discipleship, and that means don't get involved too much in these political things. That's not within the institutional churches. That's not within their responsibility. But do speak on certain issues, and now we're sort of coming to full circle that things. So Trump's public repudiation of the way of Jesus, which, what is the article? It must be him, like probably talking about works or something. Let's see. I hate my opponent. Okay, well that's it. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know if he understands Trump. I mean, that's kind of when Trump's like, I hate my opponents, and he's sort of joking, but he's okay. I mean, it's not the best. This is like, it's just funny. It's like so minor in comparison, especially if you know the way Trump uses rhetoric and so forth, and his job to bear the sword. It's so minor in the grand scheme, but J.D. Greear he's got a responsibility to speak up about this. Recent Republican capitulation on killing the unborn. I think I might have seen this. Oh, the FDA approving of the drug. Is that Republican capitulation, or is that if maybe this fell through the cracks and the Republicans are going to do something about it? I think that's my hope. But okay, sure. Speak out against that. I would agree. Speak out against that. But use the pastor voice. Use the voice that you use on all moral issues, no matter who the person is who's advocating it. Use that voice. It's been too often that the voice is just signaling against the right hard and giving passes to the left, or giving vague generalities about the left and being super specific about the right. Even in this article, even in this article, he's not going after any left. He's not linking me. I don't see links here. The Democratic Party has officially enshrined. So that's the only thing I think is the platform of the Democratic Party. That's the only link. So it's more broad. But here we have, President Trump personally and a recent news story on the right. In the third commandment, one of the big 10, God instructs his people never to take his name in vain. Okay, so don't do that. When we take Jesus' gospel synonymous with political party, we tie his reputation to the party. Let me read that again. When we make Jesus' gospel synonymous with a political party, we tie his reputation to the party. Who's doing that? I don't know. Let me skip ahead here. Often in politics, we must choose between the lesser of two evils. Okay, we should not make it difficult to Gentiles who are turning to God. Okay, now we're bringing in another element of this. Acts 15, Jesus' half-brother, James, says, let's see, I could pastor over the desk of every pastor study in the Western world. We should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. What does that mean? Some Jews wanted to make conformity to secondary cultural applications of the law a prerequisite for membership. Okay, so we're down to the Judaizer heresy. And the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15. What does this have to do with anything? He says, early church leaders asked both Jews and Gentiles to hold their secondary convictions and their preferences, applications of Christian living in ways that wouldn't make it hard for unsaved members of the other group to find their way to church or to God. I want to say this to church leaders in America. Don't make it hard for Republicans or Democrats to find God. Here we go. How are we going to make it hard for Democrats? I'm just curious. Don't make it hard for black or white seekers or for brown or Asian seekers. Who's doing it? Who's doing that? Give me a firm example here, JD. Don't make it hard for police officers or public school teachers. Well, did you do that when you said that Black Lives Matter was a gospel issue that needed to reform police departments? You already broke that one, JD. I mean, right? I mean, am I right or not? Preach the whole counsel of God, but don't make it hard for anyone. Okay, you only make it hard for people when you start adding to God's revelation. You start adding to his law things that aren't there, and you start vilifying certain classes of people based upon their profession in extra biblical ways. Maybe that'll make it hard. Oh, who did that? J.D. Greear did that. I imagine James, in the spirit of Acts 15, might reply, there should be all kinds of things that you would say around the fire pit that you wouldn't say around the pulpit. Let's get to the bottom line here. This article just keeps going on and on. Okay, we're going back to slavery. And we're comparing now slavery with the Nazis. JD's so sloppy. Okay. Can we get to the bottom line here, guys? There it is. He published a book. He wants you to read the book. Let's get to the last part here, the conclusion. If we're his followers, that will be true of us too. Jesus warned about 11 of the Pharisees that he said could spoil the whole loaf. Beware of those, Jesus warned, who love long flowing displays of righteousness, but are woefully short on gospel fruit. We must beware of those who have long diatribes. What was this article? X threads and Substacks, but can't point to someone from across the political aisle from whom they have befriended and sought to love. Frankly, I don't care. Honestly, I really don't. I don't think, does God, I just don't get this, because it's like people live in certain areas of the country where if you preach what the Bible says about things like abortion and homosexuality, those two things alone that are so obvious, you are going to have a right-leaning church. Leftists aren't going to come, basically. If they do show up, they're going to be confronted with it pretty quick. And they're going to have to repent. They're going to have to choose which side they're going to, it's going to be a quick confrontation, guys. It just is. This isn't the same. He is drawing, even in this post where he says he doesn't want to do the moral equivalency, he basically does. He keeps giving more right-leaning examples of how there's compromise out there. And then, how do you judge the metrics of it? You got to appeal to both sides. I think that you should be nice to people who are Democrats. There's no doubt about that. I think that God wants you to give the gospel to what? Every creature. Make disciples of every creature. That means that you're going to come into conflict with people who are Democrats. In the area I live in, I interact much more with Democrats than I do Republicans on a day-to-day basis. Now, here's the thing about that. they are going to, they do not like my morality. They do not like Christian morality. And so if I'm going to appeal to them, I'm going to have to compromise the truth. If I really want to be friends with all of them, like on a, if I want to, I can be friends on a superficial level, but if I really want to be real friends with them, I'm going to be talking about friendship. And that's going to be the subject of my talk in Indiana on the 25th. Then it's just a barrier because that's so part of their identity, oftentimes. So anyway, beware of those who loudly condemn in the public square, but show no zeal and no effectiveness in gathering the poor and crippled and blind and lame of all varieties around God's bountiful table. You're very loud in the public sphere, JD, and I saw what you did to Faith Baptist Nightdale. So I'm just going to say, I think you're a total hypocrite on all of this. They just might be leading us into the very ditch of unfaithfulness. All right. So the whole effect of this is to be suspicious of overly political pastors. He doesn't give you firm examples of what that might look like. I mean, he could have talked about Josh Howerton or Greg Locke or use some example to show us what he's talking about. He doesn't really do that. So it's kind of, I understand there's times when your audience knows what you're talking about, you don't have to put meat on the bones, but when they don't, and when you're all over the place in the article and it's a complicated subject, it is good to probably give an example, right? So we just still don't have that, which makes this more difficult, but it's a very serious thing. So it'd be nice if he had an example of what he's talking about. Just one would suffice, I would think. This doesn't really change much. I think what's the effect of this article? I'll tell you how it hits me. I think that it's kind of a pivot. JD is saying, yeah, I shouldn't have insinuated that right and left are technically morally equivalent, even though this article kind of rehashes the same things that he's said for a long time. Social justice, right? The examples he brings up are things the left would also condemn primarily. It's still kind of the old JD, but there's some clips from this that you can take and say, see, he said right here, he wants to posture himself as like being kind of third way above the political fray because the priority is making disciples. And so you do speak with moral clarity on those issues, but it's got to be making disciples. And so he doesn't really give you great categories for what it looks like to speak with that kind of moral clarity. I think it's just an assertion that he's doing it right and other people are doing it wrong. I think honestly, that's what I'm getting from the article. I've got the balance. I've been a little off sometimes, but I've got the balance. Let's take some questions. Maybe that'll help flesh some of this out more. Agree on calling out rhinos and sin, but are you switching sides in the Great War? I don't know if this is for me and JD. That's the question, right? Are you switching sides? JD, we'd love to have your help. If you repent of your sin, and JD wouldn't be a pastor, though. That's the problem. His sin is so egregious at this point. His decision-making abilities are so bad. But we'd love to have the help on whatever level you can give it. You got to switch sides, though. We got to push against the evil of the left. Yes, the right people on the right do some evil. There's no question. But on the political front, and you've been involved in politics, JD, we need your help in pushing against the left. That's where the threat is coming from. We need moral clarity on that. Point it out when it's on the right too. Sure. Absolutely. But we got it. We need to know what time it is. And the big threat is on the left. And you're discipling people who live in a world, in a community. And part of making disciples is to help shepherd them on these issues. Oh, goodness. Okay. Is Switzerland trading with the Axis? That is such a brilliant question, Design Build. Is Switzerland, JD is Switzerland, is he trading with the Axis? All right. Let's get to some other questions here. Isn't Romans 13 the prescription for a better Rome? Oh, goodness. That's a good point. Yeah, I would say so. That's political. Is Luke 12 about politics? Were they confused about the law or policy? Maybe this was a he said, she said quandary. I'm going to have to look up Luke 12. I should know this, but okay. Warnings against hypocrisy. Parable of the rich fool. Watchfulness. Jesus telling them to be watchful. Saying that he has come to, I think this is probably what he's getting at, not have peace, but bring a sword to turn people against each other. I mean, look, that's when you're talking about gender and LGBT, the people are turning against each other. Like, you're going to have to take a side. It's going to be politicized. Everything's politicized now. We're coming down to some base moral issues. Like, it's just, JD can't be a corporal. JD can be a private in this war if he wants to be. Let's see. Other questions. I saw third way defense of Gavin Ortland claiming Keller's vocation was different than Kirk's. True, but do people only wear one hat in life? Yeah, right. Okay. I'm not going to give my thoughts. I've talked about Gavin Ortland in the past a little bit, but not for this podcast. We've already been going about an hour and 20, and I still want to play some other things for you. I am going to play this clip. This is from a debate, Virginia gubernatorial debate.
The first example has been shaping the race for governor and attorney general for the past week. You both will have a chance for rebuttal. Democratic Attorney General nominee Jay Jones admits he sent text messages to a colleague referencing former Republican House Speaker Todd Gilbert. Here's what he wrote.
Jones. 3 people, 2 bullets. Gilbert, Hitler, Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. Colleague. Jay, please stop. Jones. LOL, okay. I mean, do I think Todd and Jennifer are evil and that they're breeding little fascists? Yes. Colleague. You were talking about hoping Jennifer Gilbert's children would die. Jones. Yes, I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy.
Jay Jones has apologized and says he takes full responsibility for those messages. Ms. Spamberger, you have called the comments disgusting and said you condemn violence. The question for you tonight is, were you aware of these messages before they were released publicly, and will you continue to endorse Jay Jones as the next Attorney General of Virginia? You have 60 seconds.
The comments that Jay Jones made are absolutely abhorrent. I denounced them when I learned of them, and I will denounce them every opportunity I get. As a mother, as a public servant, as a candidate for governor, I denounce them. And it is important that candidates always denounce violence on no matter which side of the aisle. Violence, violent rhetoric, we should always be focused and forceful in our denouncement of it.
Are you going to tell him
and
to get
importantly,
please
my opponent, unfortunately, only denounces violence when her side is the target. I hope
like that,
into
Abigail.
the future she will endeavor to denounce violent rhetoric and violence no matter who the victim. And tonight, Lieutenant Governor Earl Sears, I will say, you routinely referred to me as your enemy.
Just please
You
give her a chance to
routinely
respond.
refer to me as your enemy. I'm not your enemy. You are not my enemy. We are political opponents, and tonight voters are here to listen to the policy differences that we have. So as we move forward, we must continue to set a good example for all of our children.
Thank you, Ms. Spamberger. I didn't hear an answer there on the endorsement issue, so I want to just make sure. Will you continue to endorse Jay Jones to be the next Attorney General of Virginia? And were you aware of these text messages before they released? You have 30 seconds.
In fact, it appears that it was those who released the text messages and held them for years. So the public was unaware who had knowledge of these text messages for many years.
What did you do about it?
I learned of these text messages the day that they came out, and I denounced them as soon as I learned of them.
She denounces murder.
And importantly, at this point, as we move forward, the voters now have this information that was withheld for them,
you're running to
presumably for
Ms.
political reasons. But the voters now have the information, and it is up to voters to make an individual choice based on this information.
Ms. Spamberger, I understand what you're saying about the voters, but for you yourself, do you still continue to endorse Jay Jones? 15 seconds, yes or no?
I We are all running our individual races. I believe my opponent has said that about her lieutenant governor nominee.
Ms. Earl Sears.
And it's
Ms.
up
Earl
to
Sears.
every person to make their own decision. I am running my race to serve Virginia, and that is what I intend to do.
Thank you, Ms. Spamberger. We just want to clarify, what you're saying is that as of now, you still endorse Jay Jones as Attorney General.
I'm saying as of now, it's up to every voter to make their own individual decision. I am running for governor. I am accountable for the words that I say, for the acts that I take, for the policies that I have put out.
Thank you.
I am responsible for the policies I put out and the work I will endeavor to do tirelessly for the people of Virginia.
Thank you, Ms. Spamberger. Ms. Earl Sears, before we get to rebuttals, because we will get to rebuttals, we have a question for you. While there is
Virginia politics is nuts, guys. I don't know what to say. Oh, you laugh or cry. Virginia politics is nuts. Where else do you have a governor who thinks infanticide's okay? And now you have a potential governor. And look, I should probably look at the latest polls. Spamberger has this to win. In Virginia, it tends to be if the administration is one way in recent years, Virginia goes the other way. So Winsome Sears, let's see. Virginia's race is tightening. Oh, give that a so I guess this is hurting her. Well, that's good news. I'm glad that being pro-murder, and I understand we're all pro-life, we're all anti-abortion, and it's like, what about the babies in the womb? Well, obviously there's Democrats who think it's not a baby yet, right? Well, in this case, we can sidestep that whole conversation because it's definitely a person that is being described. These are children who have not done a thing. They are outside the womb. And you have Jay Jones saying that his opponent's children in a private correspondence, like he'd want them to die. And to me, this whole thing is such, obviously, an easy moral decision. Even J.D. Greear. Do you think J.D. Greear, he didn't link to this? I mean, the article came out before this, I guess. But actually, I don't know. I think the Jay Jones issue is coming up. It's a neighboring state to North Carolina. In that kind of a situation, people who are still going to vote, and the majority seems, according to the polls, are still going to vote for Spamberger. You become friends with these people? How does that work exactly? That's what I want to know. I don't know if you can have a true friendship with someone like that. Can you have a friendship with someone who basically thinks that it's acceptable to murder your children? That's the gospel witness. I'm just asking, is there a situation where it goes too far? These are political lines. Don't tell me they're not. That's exactly what it is. It's an election. You have two visions of the good. And Winsome Sears is the lieutenant governor who's now running for being governor, is running against someone who refuses to take her endorsement from an attorney general, potential, who's running, has the endorsement of the Democrats still, who is a pro-murder on some level. It's insane to me that this is happening. The moral judgment is completely out the window. We're coming down to issues. There's no moral equivalency, obviously, but it's not enough, I think, to just admit there's no moral equivalency. I think it's good to go the extra step and say the Democrats, in this case, are evil. Anyone in the majority, apparently, of Virginians who vote, if they're still supportive of this, it's evil. This doesn't take a political calculation. That's the issue we're having now. And this is what I don't think Greear is still in this world where he's like, well, there's these political decisions that can be made that are secondary. And I'm thinking maybe within the Republican Party, you have some of that. Maybe you can look at a primary and see there's Republicans who have views that are not good, and you could be friends with them. You agree on the majority of things. You don't agree on some things. Maybe strategies are even different on important issues, but you both in the main agree, things like murder are wrong, lying's wrong. It's good. It's wrong to steal. All right. 10 Commandments, good. Maybe that's the issue here is like what Greear is saying. You could actually import a lot of that into a primary and it sort of makes sense. Like, well, yeah, you could be friends with the person who's not as right-leaning, but is still a Republican, still some very basic sort of moral instincts. How do you become friends with someone like Spamberger? I don't know. Or Jay Jones. How in the world do you become friends with that person? Or people who vote for them, who think Jay Jones would be solid, Jay Jones would be great. What do you do when that person wins the election and the pastors were silent and they didn't say anything because they were afraid or they thought they had to try to make sure our main focus is the gospel or discipleship or expository preaching. And so we're just not going to address the moral dilemma that is the obvious one that is in front of all of us. Well, good luck. You're going to lose the ability to do those things eventually if enough people get in who hate you and hate what you stand for. Like, good luck, guys. I don't know what else to say. It's just like, it doesn't take much either on a Sunday morning just as an aside, say, I know we're all going to be making a decision that will impact the future of our country and our state and our community and even our church and our families. And I just want you to know it's wrong to murder. It's like, it's so basic. It doesn't even, that's the pathetic thing now, right? It doesn't even take much moral calculating or bravery. You don't have to complicate it much. Not today. When it's in a situation where it's like, I don't know, graduated income tax, or are we going to go with the fair tax? It's the Republican primary. I don't know. What about the flat tax? What about the 999 plan? What about, like, that's not what we're talking about here, obviously. So who is Jay Jones and why do you care? Okay, well, someone's asking in the chat. Jay Jones is running for the attorney general position in Virginia. And he said that his opponent's children, and some private text messages that were leaked, he doubled down on it in the text message thread I saw, that they should die because of who their parents are. So there you go. Okay. Reality is Spamberger will win by 8 to 10%. Jones won't lag Spamberger by more than 5%. Winsome Sears needs to keep the margin less than 5%, but it's highly unlikely. Northern Virginia wine moms 100% support Jones. And it's not a far jump from we can kill our children to why can't we kill the ones outside the womb? I mean, right? It's why not? So, man, I sort of went frying pan to fryer, right? I'm sitting in New York. I moved out of Virginia, and I feel this weird, like we're enjoying a lull right now. Cause there's bad stuff is happening, but it's like 2020 was so bad. People were just pouring out of New York. It sort of slowed down. And so, but I just feel like once the Trump administration it ends, and Lord willing, it's someone else that can carry the MAGA torch. But if that doesn't happen, and if a Democrat gets in there, it's like New York's not going to be a place you want to be. And I don't think Virginia is, if this is allowed to continue. I mean, it's insane. Okay. Let's continue here. And I have a few other things I wanted to talk about. One of them is this Vivek Ramaswamy video. And then one of them I wanted to just mention is this New York Times article on a private park. We'll start with that. A private park. And this private park is in the state of North Carolina, where J.D. Greear is. By the way, J.D. Greear was vocal on this issue. He wanted the Confederate monuments taken down. And this is, he was okay to take part in that moral issue, because that's a gospel thing. That's important. That's part of making disciples right there, is to take down these monuments that say things like, to those who defended North Carolina and didn't come home, these war memorials, because we'll just interpret them as racist. We'll just say that that's the intention of why they were put up, since they were put up during times when the Klan was around. So that must have been the intention, even though you don't find that on the markers for these particular monuments. Authorial intent, guys. But Southeastern was big against these. J.D. Greear was big against these. It was just in the water. I was there at the time. And a bunch of them came down. It's really sad. I remember going to going to the Capitol, going to Raleigh, and looking at these monuments. One of them was called the Mother's Monument. And it was so sad. It was just a mom receiving her dead son back from the war. And it made no racial statements or anything. And there was a hit piece. NBC came down, Lester Holt, and they did this hit piece on it. And the narrative that they went with was, as they're zooming in on the Mother's Monument, was that this was intended to intimidate minorities. And I remember they had a naming, what was it called? The Historical Commission for the state of North Carolina was trying to evaluate whether or not they should take these down, keep them up. And they had a hearing, a public hearing in Raleigh. And there was probably 30, 40 people who gave their opinion. And there was only 2 that I remember from the broadcast that were against the monuments. Everyone else was for the monuments. You had veterans, you had Black people, you had the whole gamut was for keeping these things. And the media that night only showed the 2. It showed like 4, and it, of course, half of 50% was those who were opposed to them. And they end up taking them down. And one of my introductions to media bias. And to me, this was a Maoist style eradication of local and regional memory. It was taking down heroism, it's taking down, and in the name, of course, of like, this is all about slavery and Jim Crow and that kind of thing. But that's not why they were put up. Certainly the people who were fighting were responding, especially in North Carolina. You even look at even if you want to say their secession was motivated by preserving slavery, it doesn't, not really, not for North Carolina, it wasn't. They responded to a call for troops. Lincoln wanted to invade, and they didn't want to be in that kind of a union. And regardless of their motivations, even in secession, though, they're fighting a war where most of these soldiers don't own slaves. They are not motivated by wanting to keep slaves they don't own. They are, I mean, as one Southerner said, it's because you're down here. They wanted to preserve their homes. And I don't care what side or what interpretation you have of that particular conflict. It's a war memorial to soldiers. You can honor the memory of soldiers. And so there's my 2 cents on it. And I've gotten in trouble for this opinion, but I don't care. I will triple down on this, because it's not just my ancestors, which my ancestors did fight in this conflict. I have ancestors on both sides, but I have quite a few in the South. None of them held slaves. None of them were fighting for that. But I also I think this is basically the eradication of the reconciliation motif. This is the cancellation of the regional differences the North and South had, that they were able to come together at veterans gatherings, at dedications for some of these monuments, reunions. And then you saw a merging of, okay, we'll accept Lincoln as a hero. You accept Lee as a hero. And this will be part of our pop culture. We'll even, U.S. military will have advertisements for joining that have Stonewall Jackson and portray Robert E. Lee. And we're going to come together. We're truly going to bury the hatchet on this. And the South has a place in this country. Well, that's what this was, a second Reconstruction. This was saying, we don't want any elements of the traditional South. And it was really the honor culture that they were going after. And we're going to eradicate it. We're going to erase it from memory. We're going to memory hole it, to take a 1984 word. And it was extremely sad to me to see this. And it of course didn't just affect Confederate statues. This went to Columbus. This went to some of the founders. And there were some noble people who tried to preserve some of the monuments. I did actually a documentary. You can go online, type on YouTube, Last Stand Studios, American Monument. I did a whole documentary on this. I traveled throughout the South and other regions to get footage and so forth. And there were some noble people who tried to take a stand when no one was doing it. Some of the people now who are so anti-woke and so forth, they'll say, I remember some of them. They were totally against these monuments, or they wouldn't lift a finger to help in this effort. They were afraid of being called racist. And look, welcome to the fight. But, we lost some history in this process. Trump's been doing a good job. I mean, Pete Hegseth has done a good job. I live near West Point. They just restored Robert E. Lee's portrait there. Thank God. He's a hero of West Point. before the Civil War even happened. So he was instrumental in winning the Mexican-American War. So all that to say, one of the heroes was a woman in North Carolina. And I'm going to show you this article. This is recent from the New York Times. In private park in North Carolina, Confederate statues are rising again. Now, this is a park that's not just for Confederate statues. This is a park for all veterans' monuments. That's the vision, at least, behind it. And it's just a lady who wants to dedicate her time and efforts to ensuring that these things are preserved. So it's a noble effort. Deborah Barter is the park founder. And there she is. And you have Tony London, who helped create Valor Memorial. She believed Confederates deserve the same respect as other veterans. Pretty reasonable when that's your family's history, by the way. Anyway, this didn't prevent the New York Times from doing a hit piece. And really the only thing I wanted to say about this, I mean, it's the typical, I'm not going to read it, but it's the typical what you'd expect, is we were told at the time that taking these out of the public view would make them safe, that they could be contextualized, that they could go into a private collection. As long as it wasn't on public land, it was okay. That's what we were all told, because I remember I was there. It was all a lie, guys. It was all a lie. It doesn't matter. Municipalities that are hard left that took these down want to destroy them, like in Charlottesville. They don't want these going up anywhere else. They want to erase the memory. It's not enough to even contextualize it. They want it gone. They want it memory hold. They want to sever you from your past. And you say, well, I don't live in the South. I don't have this connection. Well, like I said, this whole zeitgeist was going after more than just the South. That was the low-hanging fruit. They were going after Lincoln statues. Boston removed a Lincoln statue by the time, and there was a sea change, and the revolution didn't get as far as the revolutionaries wanted. Next round, they're going to come for the rest of it. And unless we double down and we take the position that it all needs to go back up, that this is wrong, as long as we give a moose a muffin, they're going to take more. I don't see any way. Trump has the exact right position on this. And he's doing what he can within his power to restore things like the Reconciliation Monument and the names of the forts and these kinds of things. That's our cultural memory. In a Maoist-style revolution, in places like South Africa, you see this, where things are renamed, statues come down, and what's the next step? What's the next step after those things change? You target the people who are associated with them. Doesn't matter if they were for the initial steps of the revolution, they will lose. That's how this works. I'm reminding you, this revolution isn't over. You might think that the woke era, we even talk about it that way, it's over. Not for the New York Times, it's not. Not for the hard left, it's not. It can come storming back very easily. All it takes is one election. We'll see what happens. People are very fickle. The political landscape is very volatile right now. And if you don't think that it can come storming back, you're very naive. In 2020, if we trace the trajectory, if we said, well, if this continues 10 years from now, we're going to be in this crazy place. And then, well, little did we know, history changed. We had a reprieve. Well, and now people are tracing, well, in 10 years, if the young Zoomer males, if they keep going this direction, guys, it could be different in 5 years from now. That's the we're deracinated. We're deracinated. We don't know who we are. We have amnesia as a people. We are open for anyone's manipulation. And that's what I want to talk about kind of in closing here, to be honest with you. I'm going to play a clip from Vivek Ramaswamy, and then I am going to comment on the Candace Owen stuff. And I'm going to tell you exactly where I think we are.
Conservative, correct?
I'm a proud conservative.
If you are an Indian, a Hindu, coming from a different culture, different religion than those who founded this country, those who grew this country, built this country, made this country the beautiful thing that it is today, what are you conserving? You are bringing change. I'll be 100% honest with you. Christianity is the one truth. Jesus Christ is God, and there is no other God. He is part of the Holy Trinity, and any other God is a demon, and it's false. How can you represent the constituents of Ohio who are 64% Christian if you are not a part of that faith?
Like I said, I'm not here to justify my faith to you any more than you are to me. But what I do share is the value set this country was founded on. And I think that it's really important that we not reinvent the founding of this country and what it was actually all about. The founding fathers, they had an opportunity to write a religious code just like most other nations in human history. All right, founded either on a monarch or a particular faith or a particular lineage. That's where most nations in human history are founded. Not America. We are the only country in the human history where there is a set of civic ideals that brought together a divided polyglot group of people 250 years ago, where freedom of conscience was a core belief set of our founding fathers, all the way to Thomas Jefferson. You know who he is? You know what document he signed?
The Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, and what was his belief system?
He was a deist.
He was a deist. Our third president, the man who signed this nation into existence, was a deist. Do you know who Benjamin Franklin is?
Yes.
Do you know what his belief system was?
He was Quaker, yes.
He was also a deist, similar to Thomas Jefferson. So what I think that we often do is we talk about U.S. history. I have a better suggestion. Let's actually consider reading U.S. history. Consider studying U.S. history. Learn the founding of our country, and that's what made our founders, I believe, the most extraordinary people known to the history of man. We would do well to actually respect their legacy rather than to reinvent some sort of imitative version of every other nation in human history. That's not us. I'm sorry, that's what makes America great, and that's why I am proud to be an American. This is the country that I will die fighting for if I have to, because it stands for those ideals, and that's why we're here.
Right, so
keep praying and pledge allegiance to the flag, my friend. Thank you.
Of course, Christ is king, but my response to that would be the same way that my church would let a practicing Hindu, a practicing Muslim, a practicing Jew come in and enter and worship with us on a Sunday morning. That person would not be allowed membership. And I'm not saying don't give other religions citizenship. I'm just saying you can have freedom of religion in an extremely religious environment. And that is what our founding fathers intended. If you look at the structure of our government, it is a replication, a mirror of the structure of Reformed churches in America in that time.
Absolutely. I think our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. The question is, what are those values? They're the values enshrined in the Ten Commandments. Do we share those values in common? You're darn right we do. And I think that people of most faiths across this country share those values in common. What we're failing to do is actually standing for those values in the government as it actually runs. And so, what I suggest is study U.S. history, study what made the country great. And if you think Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin were not eligible to be founders or leaders of the country because they were deists, then you and I respectfully have a difference of opinion. And yet the beauty of our country is we're still able to have that difference of opinion and still call ourselves fellow citizens. Thank you, my friend, all right?
Thank you very much, Vivek. Have a great rest of your day. God bless you. Christ is king.
Thank you, my man, all right? Keep praying. Thank you. Last question. We'll give you the final word, ma'am.
Sorry about that. My mouse conked out on me. So I was actually trying to end the clip earlier than that, but you got to hear the full thing. So that was Carl Benjamin. Sorry, did I say Carl Benjamin? No. Why am I Benjamin Carl? Carl Benjamin's a comedian. It's Benjamin Carl. And bright guy. I think he's young. He's probably in his early 20s. He had a better grasp of U.S. history than Vivek did. And it's because I think, probably his dad taught him, and he's probably listening to some good material out there. But what you're hearing in that is that Vivek he's grasping for something that he can be part of and share in common with the people in Ohio who are Republican and who claim to be Christian, that he can have in common with them so that they can vote and share a society together. And he can be a leader even in that society. And I think this is the quest of the day and especially on the right. The left is a little better at knowing what they stand for. They're fractured as well between very hard left elements and those who have liberal instincts and those who have complete post-liberal kind of revolutionary woke instincts. And the Republicans have a much bigger tent, but they are in the process of trying to figure out what it is that binds them and binds Americans together. What makes us unique? Why should we care? If we're supposed to make America great again, what is America? And Vivek has a vision and a version of that. In his version, it is a compilation of civic ideas that were shared by the founding generation that have basically stood the test of time and still are here today, and they can be shared by anyone who lives here. There is another idea, and we could call Vivek's idea the proposition nation. I think he is a proposition nation guy. America is basically an idea. That idea is a shared creed. That creed is essentially a shared interest in hard work, social equality, treating other people with respect. It's very general things, and it's kind of abstract. For people like J.D. Vance, and I've been beating this drum since long before Vance was on the national stage. So you can go back to guys in the 20th century who have pointed this out, like Mel Bradford, Russell Kirk, or the Southern Agrarians. They were looking at an actual specific place, that the country was not an abstraction. It was an idea. It wasn't a bundle of certain values necessarily, although values are important. The country's identity comes back to a rooted tradition. It's a particular people that came from a particular place and carried with them a particular way of living. And yes, attached to that is a particular religion. That religion is Christianity. And so you can have tolerated minorities in a Christian country, but at a time when the states were more definitional, it was basically state religions, state default settings that preferred Christianity. And those who lived in those states who were not Christians were along for the ride. They were not able to have influence, and they were not a threat at that time to have influence at the higher levels to change things. Since the United States has changed via immigration and things like as liberalism and secularism have increased, you have a large group of non-Christians and other belief systems, and they have gained positions of influence. And the question has been, even since JFK, who's a Catholic, I mean, there was a time when the Protestant ruling class was very suspicious of Roman Catholics coming here from places like Italy and Ireland. And they wanted to keep those people out of having influence. They could live here, but you can't have influence. And when JFK ran for president, that became an issue. But the thing is, and I think that this is covered somewhat in the book by Samuel Huntington, Who Are We?, from 2003. The Catholics in this country somewhat assimilated, somewhat took on some Protestant kind of characteristics in their public life. And what we've had is sort of a fusion, a formation of okay, we'll allow Catholics to control these areas, have this influence. And it's another form of similar to, it's part of Christendom. So there's similarities between that and Protestantism. They're both European. It's becoming stretched so far now that Jewish people, at least, there's sort of the Ten Commandments. There's an Old Testament tradition. You hear Vivek trying to the Ten Commandments. Now you got Hindus. Now you got Muslims. Now you have, look at places like Minneapolis. The mayor is a advocate for, was it Uganda? He's not even American in really any sense other than, he knows English, but it's getting crazy. Absolutely crazy. I just saw a video of the Muslim call to prayer in Dearborn, and this lady's complaining as it's going off on a video saying, this doesn't feel like America. No, it doesn't. No kidding. I was in Dearborn like 15 years ago, and it already wasn't feeling like America. You go to the Mall of America. It's called the Mall of America. It doesn't feel like America in Minneapolis. Anyway, what I wanted to say, though, about this is it's not possible to form a shared society where everyone has shared values if you don't have some kind of religious establishment. You do need that. And if it's a broad religious establishment that at least, okay, we all share in common the 10 Commandments and the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. We have a general interest in those things, and so like that we can share a society. Well, that's even pretty broad, but okay, we can try that, right? We could try to see how this works. We're just so beyond that now. What do you even do? How do you form a society? And I think what's happening in real time, whether you like it, this is not a question of whether you want it to happen. What is happening is 2020 broke whatever consensus previously existed that was left over from the Cold War. The Cold War kind of channeled this sort of watered down Christianity that combined with, you could say Judeo-Christian, but it was a broad, watered down Christian sensibility. And that was supposed to, at least the mythos was, that was supposed to be influencing our institutions. 2020 kind of just broke all trust in whatever that was. And we just realized that's not even the case anymore. You can't trust any of the institutions, it seems like. That's how a lot of people think, at least. And I think the significance of what Candace Owens is doing right now is she is finally revealing the damage that this is causing. Because think about it this way, whatever you think about what happened to Charlie Kirk, and I do have my opinions on it, Candace Owens is going out on a limb and she's saying, don't believe the quote unquote official narrative. Don't believe what TPUSA is saying. Don't believe what really anyone is saying except me. I am now the source of authority and I'm going to get to the truth. You're not being told the truth. I'm going to get to the truth. Just keep listening to me. And I'm going to keep revealing it kind of progressively. She has a text message. She holds on to it. She leaks it. She teases. Should we talk about the rest of the text messages? There's nothing she's revealed that has fundamentally changed anything I believed or any of the people I respected believed about this situation. I did a video a few weeks ago and I was just like, look, and I just sourced it all. Here's what Charlie Kirk has said about Israel. Here's what Charlie Kirk himself has said about his religion, right? And Candace Owens has been kind of all over the place on a number of things. She's even backtracked some things, and I don't really want to even get into all of her. She changes by the day on what she's saying and so forth. But I do think the main thing that came out this week, where she reveals this text message, and Charlie Kirk is upset that a donor who's pro-Israel has pulled back, and he's saying it sounds like he's threatening, I'm not going to be pro-Israel anymore if this kind of thing keeps happening. And then Josh Hammer says, look, I have information that's came after this private thread where Charlie Kirk sent the message. And this Zoom call was reported on by the New York Times. Charlie Kirk is advocating for Israel. Charlie Kirk, he reveals text messages where Charlie Kirk is thanking Josh Hammer for his advice and wisdom. So now you have his text message war. Who's telling the truth? Is it Josh Hammer? Is it Candace Owens? If you look at what Charlie Kirk has said publicly, it just seems so clear to me what happened, because Charlie Kirk wasn't hiding it. In fact, have you ever gotten upset in a private message and you say things you wouldn't want to be said publicly? You blow off some steam. I mean, I know I've done stuff. I'm irritated. Something happened and I'm venting to people, right? Hopefully I do that less and less. I don't want to do that, but of course I've done that. Where I'm saying, can you believe this? Man, what if I didn't do this or whatever? You're upset. Something happened that's affecting you. What would you put more stock in? What Charlie Kirk has said in a private text to Candace, or that Candace Owens is revealing, a private message to supporters, or what he's actually said publicly about the issue? Same issue. What he said publicly, I think, actually goes farther. He said he's revealed how upset he is about being called things like anti-Semitic, how donors have pulled out because of him platforming Tucker. He thinks it's wrong when someone knee jerks and says you're anti-Semitic for criticizing the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Yet at the same time, you see the letter he wrote to Netanyahu, which Candace Owens totally misconstrued that. I mean, I don't know why anyone listens to her, to be quite frank. I mean, that was such a royal blunder, but she has her own spin. She's not just revealing sources. She is revealing sources, and she's putting it in a context in which it's leading you to trust her more. That's basically what's happening. What this reveals, though, about us is more important to me than what it says about Israel policy or Charlie Kirk or any of that. What it reveals about us is that there's a large group of people out there, many of them on the right, and they are more willing to believe Candace Owens, who is kind of stumbling all over the place, and what she says happened, which leads you to the conclusion that Israel killed Charlie Kirk or indirectly had someone do it. They're willing to believe that over Kash Patel, over the FBI, over the security footage that's been revealed, over the reports about the gun and the bullet and the forensics and the logistics and all the rest. This unfolding of an investigation. The Trump administration obviously hired Kash Patel to reform the FBI. Charlie Kirk was friends with Kash Patel. Charlie Kirk is friends with JD Vance. I mean, I've said this before. It'd be the dumbest thing Israel's ever done in their history to assassinate Charlie Kirk at this point. Like, it'd be just so. It would be against everything that you've ever been told about how smart Jewish people are. It would contradict all of that. It would just be a colossal mistake. Charlie Kirk was, if anything, probably a net asset. I mean, why wouldn't they kill other people? Why wouldn't they target Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and I could name so many others? Why Charlie Kirk, right? I mean, there's just so many, and I've already gone through all that. But what it reveals is that people are willing to believe it's Israel over the things that have been revealed in the course of the investigation. That it was Tyler Robinson, that he was attending and part of this Salt Lake City queers, that the Salt Lake City queers were getting money from China indirectly. So China doesn't even come up in any of this. It's only Israel, right? Charlie Kirk has said things against Islam and other regions. They're not suspected. I think it's bonkers. China keeps coming up or doesn't come up at all, even when that's part of the investigation now. No, I think this is an ideological response, but that's what happens when people are unstable, don't trust the institutions. Now they're deracinated from their past. They're looking for something to coalesce around and bind around, and it becomes personalities. It becomes the podcast you listen to. Outsource your thinking to them. It becomes something that makes you feel a certain way because you can't trust the process. It used to be the institutions were validated because we believed that they actually took truth seriously. There was a peer review process. There were mechanisms that were in place to prevent people who did not have your best interest in mind from getting in powerful positions. And none of that exists anymore. Even in the academy, no one trusts the academy, and for good reason. So I've said, do your own research. You got to understand how to think. When you find people that really do their homework, then you can develop a certain amount of trust for them, but you still have to do your own thinking. And you have to be content with not knowing the answers to some things. In fact, a lot of things we don't need to know the answers to. They just don't affect us on a personal level. We're not in government at national levels. It's okay. You should probably know more about what's going on in your local town. Anyway, that's what's going on. That's what I think this reveals. Not even Donald Trump is able to restore faith in the institutions. He was an outsider. He made a lateral move. He was independent. He hired people who were going to reform the system. They were even friends with Charlie Kirk. And now you don't even trust Erica Kirk. Some of you maybe who are listening, you don't even trust Charlie Kirk's own wife or the people who ran his organization that he handpicked or the people he was friends with in the administration over Candace Owens. There's no process that can adjudicate it really for some of these people. It's just Candace is the truth teller. We got to stand behind her. It's sad. It's a sad day for America. And I'm not blaming Candace for all these. She didn't cause this situation, but she certainly knows how to work it. There's a lot of people right now who certainly know how to work it. They know what image to sell you to get you to trust them. They know what to say. I say this all the time about myself. Check what I do. Check what I say. Make sure that I'm saying what I'm saying is true. Otherwise, what's the point? Why even follow my podcast, right? what check it against what the Bible says, what common sense says, what you know to be true. Use your brain. That's what I encourage people. Take a course in logic if you need to. I think going to Liberty University and getting a master's in history helped me a lot. Even though I'd already gone to seminary, I learned more about studying the Bible through the process of learning how to handle sources. And that's even been revealed in this podcast. I mean, how I even approach moral issues from the past, trying to contextualize them. I think it's so important, making sure you're not misrepresenting the way that people acted. That's the fallacy of presentism. Anyway, I think knowing fallacies, knowing how to think is so invaluable. It's worth its weight in gold. And if you're just a local leader or a lay leader in your church, it's worth its weight. We need more of that. And if we don't have local institutions that are capable of restoring faith in something beyond ourselves, we just have a shattered community, and it's just warring fans of podcasts. Is that what you want? Right? I don't want to go to I don't want to go to that place. So that's my encouragement, and that's my interpretation of what's going on out there. And hopefully that was helpful for you. I think that was about it. I don't think I have anything else queued up. Just reminding you all, I am speaking at the Jesus in Politics, October 25th. You can go to John Harris Media, find the link, sign up. October 28th, the Texas Truth Movement. I'll see some of you there in Houston. And I see some questions, but I just don't have the time, unfortunately. So God bless. And I'll try to do a podcast next week. No guarantees. My grandmother and my aunt are coming out to visit. My grandmother has not been in New York since I was like 15. And so I don't think she'll come back again, probably. And so I'm going to be spending a lot of time with her. She's never met my daughter. So I'll do my best, but I may not have a lot next week, just to give you an FYI. Anyway, God bless.